Hey guys, welcome back. If you remember one of my previous videos, I showed how to make this ultimate workbench that folds up and stores up against the wall. And at the end of that video, I actually said I already had some ideas how to improve it and make it even better. Well, in today's exciting episode, I'm going to go through those plans, show you what I did, and at the end, I'll also talk about the experience I've had with the table, things I would change if I had to do it all over again. I'll have links in the description for all the parts that I use, just in case you want to get yourself a little something for your bench. But for now, let's get into it. So first off, something that's not a part of the bench, but above it. Every good workbench needs lighting, and I figure I'm going to be using this workbench pressed up against the wall here, so lighting above it is the best thing to do. And installing lights on the bottom of a shelf is a great way to go. So I had to install a shelf, which gives me an added benefit of storing more stuff.
That's the whole meaning of life, isn't it? Trying to find a place for your stuff.
I grabbed some heavy duty brackets and some 3/4 inch plywood that's 16 inches wide, and I put the shelf up really quick. You'll notice that there's a gap here, and that's because there's electrical and or plumbing pipes running through here, and I didn't want to mess with it, so I figure I'll just skip right over it. The brackets are strong enough, the plywood is strong enough, and I'm not putting a car up here, so I think I'm pretty safe with the load capacity. One top tip is to mount the lights far away from the wall as possible. If they're near the wall, they're actually going to create a shadow line when you're working on a project down below. For the time being, I've got this plugged into a wall outlet with an inline on-off switch that came with the kit, but I plan on hardwiring it to the garage switch really soon. But for now, we've got plenty of light, so let's get on to the other stuff. I had this old power strip sitting around, so I thought it'd be a good idea to mount it to the bench. I used the old masking tape trick to mark the holes onto the surface. The problem with this trick is it still requires a Midas touch for setting the depth of the screws, and the diameter of the screw head has to be just right. In my case, they were a bit too large, so fitting them was pretty frustrating. In the end, I just smashed them into place.
Smash.
The power strip is a bit wobbly, so I'm sure it'll piss me off before I know it, and I'll come up with another idea to get it mounted better. But for now, it's in the perfect spot. It's out of the way and can remain plugged in while the bench is stowed or in use. And if I want to roll the bench away from the wall, I have 8 feet of cord to cover most distances where I'd use the bench. Every bench needs a decent bench vise, and I've got this Littleton 4-inch bench vise mounted to this sheet of plywood to make it removable. I use these T-track clamps to snug it down onto the tabletop, like this. I mounted the vise to the plywood by sinking the nuts into the wood. I also cut one of the bolts down to be flush, but the other two I kept protruded so that they can catch the edge of the bench and give me a little more security. You can also take the plate and push it up against the T-track bolt for a little additional security. So with that bench vise taken care of, it got me to thinking I can mount other items to a sheet of plywood and clamp it down, like a grinder or a buffing wheel or any other type of bench tool that gets clamped down, typically in a permanent situation. That hole in the plate, by the way, just lets me hang it out of the way when I'm all done. Some say you can never have too many clamps, and what's a vise except for a big fancy clamp that's mounted to a table? If you're going to dip your toe into the woodworking projects, you need a decent woodworking vise, and a quick release lever is a really nice feature to have. So I grabbed this Yost 7-inch, took a ton of measurements, and came up with a plan. It involved cam clamps and T-tracks. This was quite the challenge to sort out. I knew I couldn't have this permanently mounted to the bench for a few reasons. First, it would require me to notch a hole in the upper mounting bracket mounted on the wall, and that would require me to perfectly align the table every time I went to hoist it up into position. Plus, it would add 22 pounds to the total bench weight, and that extra weight was not an option. I wanted to make sure the top of the vise was level with the tabletop, so I had to run the numbers to figure out where the T-track would have to sit. Then it was just a matter of cutting the existing wood and adding some more that filled the void. One thing I did not plan on was running across a screw holding the frame to the bottom plate, and that's exactly what I did. Guess how I ran into it? Yep, with the chisel. Several times. So after I loudly uttered some nasty phrases not suitable for the YouTube algorithm, I grabbed another chisel and chipped out the rest of the wood, then took a hacksaw to the screw to get back on track. I'll fix that chisel later. To install the mounting bracket, I went with both glue and screws. The vise was going to be hanging off of this area, so it has to be rock solid. And I hit it with a hand plane to smooth it out and make it flush. I used the blue tape trick again to mark where the mounting points of the vise would sit, then hogged out the location for the T-track. Next, I drilled and beveled new holes for the track and attached them to the table. Moving to the vise, I installed the cam clamps and that was it. Time to put it all together. I'm using the clamp just to hold the weight of the vise while I adjust the cams. They're a bit fiddly and always need adjustment, but they do exactly what I want. Now for a quick test drive. I grabbed this 4x4 cutoff, jammed it in the vise, and gave it a wiggle. It was surprisingly solid. The last step of this install is to get some cork onto the jaws to prevent any damage to a workpiece. A roll of cork and a can of contact adhesive does the trick. I can use a total of 4 clamps, but the rear 2 are just slotted in and aren't attached through the clamp, so I'll only use them when I have something extra heavy to deal with. If you're going to have a woodworking vise, you should have some bench dogs to go with it. Instead of drilling the entire top with holes, I went with a single row of them, 4 inches apart, centered off of the vise dog. Seems a little overkill to do the whole top, and time will tell if I need more. If I do, it's pretty easy. After marking the locations, I drilled a pilot hole, then came in with a hole saw to finish it up. Even with the pilot hole, I'm running the whole bit backwards at first to make things easy at the start. Once they're done, I grabbed my router and ran a roundover bit on them to make everything nice and smooth. With the bare wood looking rather boring, I thought I'd slap some color on it. First step is to add some wood filler and fill the screw heads with paste wax. This will make it easy to remove them when it's time to replace the top. After spending a lot of time laying down wood filler, I applied 1 coat of primer and 2 coats of cabinet grade paint. A big thanks to Travis over at Shop Nation for suggesting the paint color, which is called Cyberspace from Sherwin-Williams. I think it works pretty good, and I'll be sticking with it for other projects. Sure enough, that wobbly power strip made me cranky, and I wanted it to be rock solid. I first thought of some sort of strap, but ruled it out quickly because it would still be overly complicated. What I came up with instead was to remove some of the screws holding this thing together, drilling out holes through the plastic and mounting it from the outside. I just had to verify the metal inside wasn't close to the screw holes to keep everything safe. So, looking at the internals, we've got 5 screws holding this thing together. We'll keep the 2 in the center to hold the case together, and we'll reuse the 3 on the outside as ways to mount this to the table. These are not near any power sources. I'm not too concerned about a screw going through them. We've already drilled the holes, so let's get it mounted. We'll use this spacer to make sure it's nice and pretty and level. That's about right. I've already got the screws set in, so here we go. That is not going anywhere. Oh yeah. Papa likey. Although there's only a couple of items and they're fairly minor, there are things you want to keep in mind when you're doing your bench. First off is the wall it's mounted on has to be flat. We're dealing with 2 sheets of 3/4 inch plywood, and when you bundle those together, they're going to remain flat as much as they want. So the wall you're mounting it on also has to be flat. I am struggling to get it on the wall every once in a while depending on temperature and humidity. And as a reminder, I'm in San Antonio, and so far this year we've had 62 days where it's been triple-digit heat. So things get a little funky out here in the garage because it's not climate controlled. Another thing to keep in mind are the wheels that I chose. I chose them because they were small size, but they're not a very great quality. And what I mean by that is when you put your foot on them to lock them in place, you can easily overlock them. The little pedal that you push down goes so far down that you can't use the tip of your toe to pop it out and unlock it. You need a crowbar or a long screwdriver to pry it out. It's a little frustrating. Use better lumber. The stuff I found during the pandemic, which means everything was really expensive, was the cheapest stuff at the big box store. And it was probably a little too green. It probably dried out during the construction process and or since I built it. So things aren't fitting precisely as they should be, and the cuts need to be a little more defined. At the end of the day, this is not a very inexpensive project. You've got some money invested into this. So add a little more, get some quality lumber, make sure it's straight. If you need to trim it down, go ahead and do that. make sure that everything lines up a lot better than what I slapped together. Other than that, I think this bench is really good and it's going to serve me a good long time. So that's it. Let me know your thoughts. Are there any changes you would make to a bench that I didn't think of? Put them in the comments down below and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks everyone.